Hi everyone, it's Jerry. Let's have a look at the remaining 4 games of the 2018 Candidates Tournament. 4 players are still in contention to become challenger for the world title going into this final round. This first game is the one that is insignificant between Aronian and So. It would have no impact on the final result. Game ending with a Grandmaster draw. Repetition of position on board. Moving on to the second game. So that first one that I just shared was over in probably just about 10 minutes. This one here between Karjakin and Ding Liren had a Roy Lopez on board, a closed system, and we got to observe a knight versus bishop type imbalance in this one. As we will soon see, Ding Liren is the one who has a bad bishop, multiple black pawns getting in its way. Rook a2 is preparing to try and take control of the a file, so black shuts that down with b4. A little knight reposition, play ensuing on the king side, and white has a strong knight, black not so great bishop, but on the other hand, black has some nice major piece pressure along the f file. Really piling up on the f-file now. f3 is sensitive. Here comes h4 and a distracting move h3. King has to make a decision, and f3 can now be picked up next. There we go with the f-pawn. Black is now up a pawn. Has an active rook, but that is quickly neutralized, so we get to this simplified endgame. Minor pieces only. Knight versus bishop. Continuing. Black picks up another pawn, still playing with all 8 pawns. White with 6, but has a strong knight. So this is a pawn you have to be on the lookout for. The king is the one who will be responsible for tracking that pawn down. And even though black has an extra pawn in this position, it's a dead draw. This knight simply never moves, and this king will simply go back and forth for the rest of the game. No progress to be made for Team Black. No way to get the king active, no way to improve the bishop. In fact, the bishop will never see a single square on any of these ranks. So actually any of the 4 ranks will not see any square on white's side. Attempts to try and, let's say, create a pawn break like this are just met with a capture, and these squares are controlled. Any push is a capture, and, well, black would have to maybe be the one who's a little bit careful. The bishop could maybe get active like this, but the knight is always quick to hunt down 2 pawns in back-to-back moves. Long story short, no good way to make progress in this very locked position. Strong knight versus a bad bishop. The third game to finish, this one here between Kramnik with white against Mamedyarov, had a Catalan where eventually white is down a pawn. Let's see how this comes about. Right at this moment, black is winning the white d pawn. The downside here is that black has backward development on the queen side. So, in particular, how do you get the light square bishop playing? White has very active pieces, so queen is getting in a different position. Bishop is a strong piece on h6. A little bit of back and forth, offering a queen exchange. It's declined. White wants to keep the queens on board, as this king is a bit vulnerable, especially having this guy around on h6. All sorts of mating ideas might be right around the corner. So the queens stay on. This knight is immune from capture because of rook takes knight. Pawn takes, bishop takes, and there's big trouble with the queen and the king. White now converging on f7. So we have c6. Knight is now defended. The e-pawn gets rolling, and the queen is trying to be distracted from defensive e5. So white picks up a pawn. Black gets the b-pawn. Black is still up a pawn in this position, but white gets the b pawn. These guys are now split, and we have a super active rook on the 7th rank. So just getting some more moves in. All of a sudden we have this in-time pressure. A tactical shot, bishop takes f2. Very interesting tactical sequence. What's the idea? Well, let's see. Queen takes bishop. And now we have bishop takes h3, trying to distract the king away from defending the queen. King g1, only move, keeping the queen defended. Queen takes queen, king takes, and now rook takes knight. And we are almost seeing the final tactical idea here, knight g4. In the end, black is picking up the bishop. So 2 minor pieces. What's the imbalance here? It's a knight and 3 pawns versus 2 pawns. Or excuse me, knight and 3 pawns versus the rook type imbalance. Currently the bishop's under fire, so he's out of the way. Black gets one of the pawns back and now slowly improves the king. It's a equal position here, difficult to make progress. And the rook is always very active in this position. Now getting behind the black position, the king can't move forward. That would be a game over move. This would be a helpmate. Rook e8 is mate. So black hunts down the e-pawn and wins it. White goes into this possible discovered check, but there isn't a good one. There isn't a good knight move that will pick up anything for black. So knight d6 in the game. If you try and save the pawn with this move, white always has a perpetual check. Check here, and even if he tries to run in this direction, well, he might even get mated if he ends up here. But there's no way to stop a perpetual check if black tries to save this pawn. So in the game, it's knight d6, king c5, knight takes bishop, king takes knight, and after king to f7, the players agree to a draw. So there's just no way to make progress. The rook moves, the king comes over here, not there, over here, and an example line might be something like this. The king will be in time to hunt this pawn down, and the rook is always around to fend off this other pawn as well. So 2 draws between Karjakin and Ding Liren ending as a draw. Kramnik and Mamedyarov ending as a draw. At this point, Caruana needs only a draw. Let's see what happened in this game. Grischuk versus Caruana. Petrov's defense, a modern attack with this d4 move. And we eventually see an imbalance regarding the pawn structure. Actually, right away, it's a 4 versus 3 in favor of Team Black on the queen side, and white has the majority on the king side. So let's see how play progresses in this one. It certainly got down to the wire, trying to meet time control before move 40. Eventually, the queens are going to come off in this one with this move knight to d4, an attack against the bishop. So the queens are off. Structure changes a little bit. And now we have another structural change with c4, grabbing a little bit of space with a punch. Black is without the light square bishop, so needs to be careful about the light squares. Pawns are around to help control them. Continuing, we have b5. White is trying to break down the pawns, get some activity for this unopposed bishop. That's secure, though. f3 follows, and now black is getting active with this bishop. Continuing, we have bishop f2. Grischuk around this point only has a couple minutes and still has, 17, 18 more moves before meeting time control. It's basically just the same story with Grischuk. Every time he plays, he's very low on time. So the rook was under fire. This was the idea with this little reposition. The bishop is on a very active square, defending against e5. But black's bishop on g3 is super invasive. He's resting in a hole in the white camp, striking at the rook e2, and now g5. Just these 2 pieces alone do a wonderful job. In fact, you really can't say enough about this bishop on g3. The pawn helps control 2 pawn breaks. The bishop, for as long as he can be maintained here, well, the g-pawn can't move. And on top of that, black exerts pressure on e5, which means the bishop and knight, 2 minor pieces, are restricting a bishop and rook. This creates an imbalance in the position. Let's see how black works with this. Both players right around, just having minutes left on the clock at this stage. We have a timely pawn break. This is where things really heated up in the game. Move 31. Not a lot of time for either player, just a couple minutes each. So let's see what happens. C takes d4, knight takes d4. Black has now acquired a passed pawn. Scary knight on board. White has to be very careful, and this bishop remains fantastic. Now that there isn't, let's see, the rook. Now that there isn't a rook around defending e5, White is switching gears here, trying to get to the 7th rank. There might be some problems here. There are a lot of squares controlled around the white king. But after a timely knight to c6, if this pawn is picked up, this king will have a wonderful post on f6. This is what happens. Bishop e4, bishop takes on e5. Move bishop takes knight can be met with rook takes bishop. That's what we have in the game. So white has this passed pawn. Black has a passed pawn. White has a passed pawn. But notice that black's rook is ideally placed, namely right behind the passed pawn, helping support its every advance. Move 37, 38, just a couple more moves to make time control. Players still just are playing off of the increment, basically. Black remains very active with the rook. And right around this point, move 40 has been met. The black king is completely safe. And black can try to simply press in this position. This is one of those no-risk positions for Team Black. Especially once this b pawn now falls. Black is simply up a pawn and has the secure king. So let's see how white tries to defend this. There's absolutely no risk. I believe right around this point, maybe even a few moves back, if Caruana offered a draw, I imagine Grischuk would have simply accepted, but Caruana continued to play on. Again, this is no-risk position. This rook is completely dead. Has to be a defender, and the rook is, I believe, one of the worst defenders against a passed pawn. This configuration, pawn on c3, bishop on d2, restrict this rook entirely, especially now with the rook in the corner here. What is this rook to even do? So, eventually, the black king is able to sneak in. We have 2 rooks. Mates, possibly right around the corner. Bishop, a couple rooks. King is very short on squares. Offer a rook exchange. Eventually it's forced. This guy is now just a single step away from promoting, and will require the defense of both bishop and rook. Both have to be allocated to defending b1. So just a few more moves coming in here. Everything is simply glued together. Again, a no-risk position for Team Black, and after this move 69, king to g3, it's at this point that Grischuk resigns. There's no way to stop something like bishop here, a check, and now this would force the king to obstruct the bishop. So this is how this game may have finished up, how it may have continued if Grischuk did not resign. But, from here you just mop up all of the pawns. Easy for these grandmasters. Caruana, the big winner of this tournament. He has, with this win in this game, won the tournament, won the golden ticket to play Magnus Carlsen later this year, November 2018 in London. I look forward to covering that event. And as usual, feel free to leave any feedback to this video. This was a fun one to certainly keep a close eye on these past few weeks. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free again to leave any comments below, and hope you got something out of it. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.